So hello everyone, good evening or good day. I'm Alex. I'm your host for today for our website Web3 Fireside Chat. And joining us is Branimir, CTO and founder of OriginTrail. Branimir, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, Alex, hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Doing well, how are you?
Good. Glad to have you here in the chat. So just a bit about our guest tonight, Branimir. He is the founder of OriginTrail and current CTO of the company. He has been in the blockchain industry for the past 6 years, studied technology and electrical engineering at the University of Belgrade in Serbia, studied a bit in the US as well, worked in the telco industry as an optimization engineer, and to mostly regarding network optimization on a global scale. Branimir, if you can tell us a bit more about your previous experience and background and how it came to change from network optimization to blockchain industry.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so I mean, basically, as an electrical engineer, I was very focused on networking problems early on. So I was busy with both measuring and like building systems to measure, but also optimize uh, basically 3G, LTE, 2G, even back in the day, networks all around the globe for companies such as Vodafone and all these big players, Verizon and so on. And it was actually, doesn't sound so natural, but it was a very natural transition from general mobile networks towards decentralized networks. So we basically started building OriginTrail way back in the previous decade, and very quickly went towards building a network system because it essentially solves a similar type of a problem. So from like first stab, it doesn't look like it's the same thing, but essentially it very much relates to each other.
Very cool, very cool. We had at our common post, we had a very interesting comment on LinkedIn from one of your people from the community, one of your people which are invested in the project, in OriginTrail project, and that person said a very interesting thing about knowledge graph and how this discussion is gonna go by comparing Google to the company that made Knowledge Graph famous. And now we're discussing with the web3 company, OriginTrail, which is connecting the knowledge graphs to the blockchain industry and also to to this web3 approach. So can you tell us a bit more about what OriginTrail is, and maybe we can go more in depth about what knowledge graphs are in the context of Web3?
For sure. Thanks, Alex. By the way, the person who commented is one of our advisors, a very big
Okay.
person in the world of knowledge graphs, Aaron Bradley. Yes, so OriginTrail essentially is something called a decentralized knowledge graph. And I need a little bit of time to unpack that. But essentially, it's a combination of two networks, blockchains and knowledge graphs, and uses these two types of technologies in what they're best for, really, to produce finally the core new primitive, basically, of the internet, which we call knowledge assets. So this decentralized knowledge graph is basically a connected graph of various kinds of knowledge assets. And these assets are, like I said, a new type of resource. That means a resource that, for example, normally you can access via a uniform resource locator or URL for regular folk. You can access knowledge assets via uniform asset locators, basically an extension of the URL for Web3. And they have some really cool properties, such as that they can be owned. So as any asset that you can own in the physical world, right? Web3 brings this component of ownership, which is actually implemented via an NFT token, a standardized token, but as well with the blockchain record that is contained within the knowledge assets, there's also basically an asset graph connected to it. And maybe you can share that slide that we discussed just briefly before the call, so it visually follows the description. So essentially, knowledge assets are these containers for ownable containers for valuable information, and that they can basically describe any physical thing, document, abstract concept, number, and essentially they live in a decentralized knowledge graph. And these are the four main components that you see on the screen. So like I said, the asset graph, which is the actual content sitting on the decentralized knowledge graph, the UAL, or the Uniform Asset Locator, which is its identifier, which is, by the way, an ownable, verifiable identifier, so you can resolve it without the need of having some third party like a DNS server resolve it. Rather, you use information that's on the blockchain and stored there by the issuer of this knowledge asset. And there's this, like I said, this NFT, the ownership record, and there's a set of immutability proofs. Like the pink part on the bottom is what's really on the blockchain, but actually all of the data is not sitting on the blockchain. Pretty much almost none of that, except the ownership record and the immutability proofs, which are actually graph Merkle roots. None of the actual data other than that is sitting on the blockchain. And this data is actually sitting on the decentralized knowledge graph. So like I said, it's a combination of two technologies, blockchains, and by that I mean multiple blockchains, and knowledge graph technology. And this bracket in the top, the parentheses saying RDF, this basically describes this resource description framework, describes these entities that I mentioned, physical, digital objects, and so on, in a standardized form. And if you might have heard before, one of basically the founders of the World Wide Web coined term semantic web, which was the original Web 3.0. Sir Tim Berners-Lee coined that term quite a while ago. And this was supposed to be the web of data. Now, there's many people saying different things. The semantic web idea did or did not happen. In our opinion, it did very much happen. And one of the proofs for that is actually the Google's knowledge graph. Google came up with this name, knowledge graph, back in the day when they actually created a semantic database, if you will, of all of the information on the internet. So, for example, if I know I'm preaching to the choir here probably because Google is on the call, but just for maybe somebody watching this on video, YouTube, or somewhere, or legitimately not knowing about knowledge graphs, that's also fine. For example, when you search for Albert Einstein in the Google search box, the search engine is going to do its usual thing, so give you a list of ranked results, but also it's going to give you, usually on the right side of your screen, actual excerpt, usually from Wikipedia or DBpedia or someplace like that, of the actual person, Albert Einstein. It actually recognizes this is a person, this is some sort of scientist, and it immediately shows you relevant information for the person, such as like age, or occupation. And that's because it knows that this is a person. It has this higher level of cognition, essentially, or has the ability to perceive the knowledge that what you typed in is not just two strings, but rather a thing. And that was the actual term that I like a lot, that Google started using to explain knowledge graphs. Things, not strings, which is basically the next level of hierarchy if you look at from data to knowledge. So a decentralized knowledge graph is very much the same technology, but extended with the powers of decentralization and blockchain. And therefore, this knowledge asset is essentially a combination of two records, a record on blockchain and interlinked record on the decentralized knowledge graph, which contains both the data and all of this information. Now, usually what people ask me about is like, what is this NFT doing and why is it in there? It's not in there to hold some sort of monkey picture or something. It's really there to be used as kind of a primitive, and this primitive itself implements ownership. So that means if I create a knowledge asset that has public information in it, I, as an owner of this NFT, when I create it, I become the owner of an NFT that was minted. I'm able to update the content of that asset in the future. And then perhaps for some reason, maybe you, Alex, find this asset interesting and you want to purchase it. Basically, we do a classic NFT transaction. So you purchase this NFT, and then from that moment on, this knowledge asset is technically really yours. And from that moment on, because you own this NFT, you're able to update or transfer it to another person, or do whatever you want with it because it's yours. So in a way, it combines these primitives from the blockchain world with the primitives from semantic web database world, and it joins these two technologies together and creates this new type of internet resource called knowledge asset.
Thank you very much for the explanation, Branimir. It's quite an extensive one. I was really curious on how the project took life. Like, was it the chicken or the egg before everything? Did you study the concept of knowledge graphics before starting the project, or was it a need in the market that you guys saw before getting into it?
That's a very good question. Absolutely was a need, actually. We didn't know much about knowledge graphs. The term wasn't even existing when we started going in that direction. But essentially, we started as a startup. The first version of OriginTrail was kind of a rudimentary version of what is it today, and it was designed to track physical items, objects, starting in the food industry, really. So we were tracking supply chain items. And the whole premise started from a very simple question. Do we know what we're eating? Like, we know a lot about the phones we buy, what kind of stuff they have inside, but like you buy a piece of meat somewhere in the retail store, and the question is it really organic? Where does it come from? Is it healthy? And then you get some more complicated products, like meat is usually a piece of meat comes from one animal on one farm. What happens when you have a composite product, when you have like a piece of cheese, which can have milk from hundreds of dairy farms? And then what happens when something goes wrong in the supply chains? So we started very much from this problem of not being able to know what was the history of really the origin of certain items. That's why OriginTrail came to be as a name. And the first systems, we quickly realized this is a distributed systems problem. So we have a bunch of this information existing in the world. Some of it is not digital if you go all the way to farming, but like in a lot of other cases, other supply chains, for example, railways, there's a lot of this information is already digital. But the problem is, even though it's digital, it's scattered around. So it's like I said, the distributed problem. The data exists, but it's kind of a little bit of it everywhere. So nobody can really get the big picture together without getting this data somehow aggregated. So we started building centralized SQL-based relational systems back in the day. And we managed to track a bunch of items in the country of Slovenia. So not very long supply chains, local products, and we got an amazing response by the market. Very quickly, a lot of companies wanted to showcase the good ones, showcase their actual provenance of their food, but also the shoppers in stores, since they were able to see that in stores, they were able to scan with their mobile phones with this original OriginTrail app. They were able to scan a QR code and see which farm the meat comes from, or which dairy farms gave the milk for certain cheeses or whatever they were buying. It was really a great response, but also followed by a question of, how can we trust this data? This is coming from a server of a small startup, right? And we, even though we never did it or we never wanted to do it, we were technically able to alter this information. We might be pressured at some point, who knows, but it's a very valid question. Somebody comes and says, okay, you say this is organic, but like, how do I know this is real? And that question really took us to the direction of blockchain, because it was very clear that at least we needed to get out of that picture as an intermediary. but also from the perspective of generally any type of data verifiability, blockchain is very useful. So you're able to have the ability to protect the integrity of some data sitting outside the chain by saying at certain point in time, it had this particular form. And that's what blockchain is great about. It's really a trust network. However, what it's not great about, it's not really a good database. Like people say, it is a distributed database. Technically it is, but it's a really poor, it basically sucks. So if you want to do a query on blockchain, really hard, which in a normal database you can do anytime. Or if you want to put a bunch of data on a blockchain, also really hard because of the consensus constraints. The constraints of the mechanism basically make it a very expensive database. And that's why it becomes so secure, right? So ideally, you don't put a lot of data on chain, and ideally you use it for what it's good for trust. So when you want to use something more data heavy, use a database. And for that particular case, and the cases that we kept exploring, graphs came to be a really good solution, because very quickly, when we got literally out of the problem of scaling queries of hundreds of farms giving milk to something, we ended up emulating graphs in SQL. We basically had nodes, edges, and they were like, connect farm with the product, farm with another product. And then we ended up having like hundreds of joins in one query. And for the people who are technical and who have been using SQL for some time know that this is a very expensive operation and it doesn't scale. Like you cannot do hundreds of joins. But when you do graphs, you actually get pre-joined data. So you can create the data connected and basically sealed in that way. And then it's very easy to access this information. It doesn't require this. It's not the same type of problem. And what also you get with graphs is you get extensibility. That's really important with any real world use case. And just to illustrate that a little simpler is it's really hard to fit some new data in like tabular form like SQL gives you. And anytime you want to do that, you kind of have to alter the database. While for graphs, you don't need to do that. So there's a new thing that comes up. You just basically create a new type of entity. It has its own schema, and then you can connect it with anything else. So essentially, these two problems, the problem of trust and us being a central broker of that trust in a way, and the problem of scaling, how do we track all of these assets in some sensible data structure, took us to graphs, and then merging those two, that basically became the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph. So back in 2017, we decided to open source everything, to create basically this decentralized network, launch it, and it was very quickly adopted by big companies such as the British Standards Institution, Swiss Railways, a bunch of US retailers, and it's used to share verifiable information about various different things in the real world. So it's been heavily used already, even though it's a web3 thing or product.
Yeah, thanks a lot for mentioning those institutions. We'll get back to those as well. I was planning of asking about them. Right now, I know that you have a huge base fan, and there are how many nodes running on your layer 2 network right now? Public nodes?
Yeah, so right now there's a new network that just launched, which has close to 100 nodes, I believe, at the moment running. These are run by the OriginTrail community. However, the previous version of the network had an even bigger number of over 2,000 nodes being run by the OriginTrail community. So it's a very, very vibrant community, and essentially they have been active since day one when the network has gone live in 2018, essentially.
Super cool, super cool. I also heard an interesting fact about the business, the fact that you have a mentor, a very interesting mentor in the advisory board, which is Professor Dr. Bob Metcalfe. Am I saying the name right? And
Bob Metcalf, yes.
Metcalf, he's well known about the Metcalf law, and also he's the father of the internet portrait. How's the collaboration with him going? Can you talk us about it a bit more?
For sure. Yeah, Professor Metcalf is one of our advisors, and like you said, he's known for the law of network effects. And this is really why OriginTrail is especially powerful technology, because it fosters and drives these network effects. The knowledge assets that I mentioned, which are basically these connected entities in graph form, they basically exhibit the same properties as network effects as you might have observed in network effects in other types of graphs. For example, the Google Knowledge Graph or the Facebook Social Graph. Basically, the value of such networks of people, of information, has grown by something called Metcalfe's law, which is this law of network effects. And it says that the value grows exponentially as the square of the number of entities in this graph. So if it's Facebook, it's the number of people's profiles. If it's Google, it's the knowledge graph, it's the number of entities in knowledge graph. And the same applies to the decentralized knowledge graph, where particularly network effects are important because it's a shared network. It is not a system that is ran by one company, corporation. Rather, it's anybody can participate in it. It's completely neutral. It actually is designed to work with multiple blockchains, so you don't even have to stick with one. You can pick one that you like, and essentially it's all built on top of standards. So this is all done so that we can drive this network effect on the level of knowledge assets, generating more value for everyone. So Professor Bob Metcalf, who is our advisor, he loved the idea of OriginTrail, and he quickly jumped on board of advising us, and we've been working together for several years now already. And he has a really great experience building out the first networks. He is known for building Ethernet, basically the first computer network. And that's when he formulated these laws and observed them, and later analyzed them in Facebook and all of these different companies. So he's very instrumental to our growth, and is definitely one of the best people we could be working with when it comes to growing network effects and generating value from them.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. Quite fascinated about how everything went to be. So if you can imagine that one person still living, like Professor Bob Metcalf has been the person which created the internet, and now we're talking about AI, web3, blockchain, and so on. So in such a short time, we're seeing such a big evolution. Going back a bit to about what you mentioned in regards to collaborations that you're having at the moment. You're working really close with the British Standard Institution. How did that benefit you, and where do you hope that this will go in the future?
The British Standards Institution, or BSI, they're one of our biggest partners. And we've been working together for many years now, building actual production applications in the real world of OriginTrail. We're their exclusive Web3 partner. And so far, we've built several different, essentially, products that are running on top of OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph. One of them is a product for the US retailers that I mentioned, which essentially covers 40% of US imports. And this particularly covers the process of auditing factories that are the sources for products that are being sold and shipped to the US. So essentially, the Walmart, Target, Home Depot, and such big retailers, Walt Disney, they essentially share privately audit information, which are knowledge assets on the decentralized knowledge graph, without actually knowing who ordered an audit for each factory, because they essentially source the same product. Like Nike shoes that come from somewhere in China. They're sold in the different retailers, but they come from the same factory usually. So they've been using this system for quite some time, and BSI was the company as a partner who basically found this particular valuable use case where the technology can be applied. Also, together with them, we just recently launched a pharmaceutical application called A-Trust, which basically enables tracking pharmaceuticals globally in a transparent, trusted manner. And it already provided quite a big impact, actually, tracking vaccines and medicines from the US to India that have been donated, where even it went so far that some malicious activity was discovered along the way and quickly solved once it was so transparent about what was going on with all of these donations. There's also several other applications that we built with them regarding training certificates that are being issued as verifiable credentials on the blockchain and the decentralized knowledge graph. So all things considered, we've been working really, really tightly together and both learning from each other, but ultimately delivering products that are actually making an impact and delivering some concrete value into the real world. And we've also done quite a bit of research and development together with them. So there's a lot of things that are going on. And for the future, we expect this partnership to even grow further. And as more assets are being included into the DKG, the value of them obviously growing. So it would be, it's something where we expect to see a lot of new growth, especially now when it comes to the topic of AI, because knowledge assets are very good substrate for AI. They're basically AI-grade knowledge assets. And when it comes to providing trust within the space of AI, they're very instrumental because you probably already know, like this whole hype around the AI recently, there's a lot of hallucinating going around, right? So the trust element can take basically this problem out of the picture because you have the ability to get trusted information as input for AI models, machine learning models, and get verifiable basically outputs out of them and verifiable answers rather than just a hallucination. We're actually working on a project right now in the EU called Build Chain that is essentially a project which tackles such a problem, which its idea is to basically create a large decentralized knowledge graph of all of the buildings and related information about them in Europe. And why is this particularly important? Because it's not just about having all of this information. This can be very, very useful in terms of safety. And for example, the recent tragic events in Turkey and around the region have shown that, like, even some of the buildings that had some proper documentation ended up being completely destroyed. And the question is, what went wrong? Is it the materials? Is it somebody not doing their job, or some corruption in the background? Probably a bunch of these things together. But having the ability to collect a lot of this information, also for measurements, digital twins, that's the goal of the Build Chain project, and basically creating these knowledge assets on the buildings. And yeah, when just mentioning Turkey and Syria, essentially they had no information on buildings. In the end, about 200 people, if I'm not mistaken, were arrested because of all of the tragic events, which ultimately means that some information was discovered of some inappropriate dealings, I would say, at least. So one of the aims of such projects is to basically provide verifiable data, verifiable knowledge about what's really going on in the world, and having digital representation of the reality, essentially, in a decentralized knowledge graph form.
Yeah, that would have been amazing to have such a solution implemented, and also having every constructor out there minting out the details of their construction in a accessible format that everyone could query. But going back to the retailers, like right now with the retailers that you are working together with BSI, like a small parenthesis. So basically, I'm a retail, I'm running one of your nodes, and what kind of details I'm minting inside of the node, inside of the knowledge graph?
Yeah, so that depends obviously on the use case, but in this particular case, the retailers share audit information. So audits that have been done in certain locations, and these are security audits. So basically, there's a very cool video on, from Ken McElroy from Home Depot, who is basically one of the senior people there, who said that if somebody told him 10 years ago or something like that, that they will be sharing information with Walmart, he said that he would pronounce that person to be crazy. But they come to this day, they're actually sharing this information. And one of the learnings they had over this whole period is they said, okay, we are competitors within our markets, but we don't compete on security. So what they are actually sharing is information about security of their supply chain through these audits, which are created as knowledge assets. And essentially that solves another problem, which is called audit fatigue. So for them, it was about each retailer in the US sending some auditing team to audit each factory. And this is done obviously more times than they needed. So they actually decided that it makes sense to share all of this valuable information. However, they still keep all of their the relevant market information out of it. So basically, they don't even know who requested an audit for a certain factory or what was actually happening there. But what I do know is that the audit was done by a certain person who was qualified to do that, actually has a training certificate for such an audit. What was done, the full audit report, and they use that basically in their procurement processes and in their supply chain integrity verification processes. So like I said, that's just one of the cases, and the information that are in there are things like geographical risk, historical information about that certain factory, all kinds of locational information, and so on. So all of this obviously wouldn't fit on the blockchain, but it fits very nicely in a knowledge asset. So that's how they use it.
So basically, putting it, you're helping in creating more equal markets, equalizing the information as well, making it available to everyone. Yeah,
exactly. The information asymmetry problem is what you're looking at. Exactly.
Yeah. And one very interesting question that we also discussed in the past. Are you tied up to any particular blockchain out there? I know that you have your own token, which you're meeting, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're attaching the NFTs and the knowledge graphs to that token, or are you working on multiple chains, and are there any intersections and integrations that you have already done?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the get-go, from this first launch of OriginTrail as a decentralized system, it was envisioned to be a multi-chain, or as we said back in the day, blockchain agnostic system. Several reasons are for that decision. One is neutrality. So the principle. Oh, yes, that's a nice chart. So one of the principles there is that we want to keep the technology neutral in many ways. So the idea is that you're not driven to pick a specific technology, like from a specific vendor or a specific blockchain. Rather, that your technology is so as neutral as possible that it can be used in multiple different environments. And one of these environments is a blockchain. So it started on Ethereum back in 2018. A couple of years later, expanded to two more blockchains, which are Gnosis or XDAI blockchain and Polygon blockchain very soon after that. And then actually this sixth version of OriginTrail, which we launched just now, a couple of months ago, launched on a new blockchain called OriginTrail Parachain, which is an actual blockchain on Polkadot, a parachain in Polkadot. So far, four blockchains have been connected with OriginTrail, but they are all connected to the same decentralized knowledge graph hosting knowledge assets, essentially. All of these are EVM compatible blockchains. And like I said, what they provide is this component of integrity, or really this trust layer, so that you can actually create knowledge assets within a blockchain of your choice. And maybe you like, I don't know, Polygon more because it has lower fees, or you're a big hardcore Ethereum fan who doesn't like the architecture of Polygon, and you can use it there. It's completely fine and agnostic towards that. The decentralized knowledge graph does operate on its own token. It's called Trace, TRAC. And this token is actually designed to be used as a utility token within the decentralized knowledge graph. So it technically lives on all of the chains that are connected to the decentralized knowledge graph. And you use it to pay fees. So if you want to create a knowledge asset, you would use Trace tokens to actually compensate the nodes that are hosting, they're going to be holding this knowledge asset on the public network. Similar to the way like you're paying transaction fees on a blockchain, and then those fees end up to either validators, miners, whatever type of system that is. On the decentralized knowledge graph, these are actually nodes hosting the DKG, and they end up proving that they're hosting this information so that they can get these rewards. So it's an incentive system to remove any type of centralized body that needs to be in there, and even if that's possibly a blockchain. So not even like one blockchain is a bottleneck in this particular design. So that opens up many other topics, like, for example, certain blockchains might provide some features that others don't, so they might become very interesting for various types of implementations of knowledge assets, and therefore it essentially creates another level of network effects. If there's new innovations in a certain blockchain area, then all of the DKG assets might be able to get that the value from that innovation. So therefore, it's kept very neutral, and the design is created in such a way that offers users choice, but also offers the most potential for network effects and for value to be generated.
Okay, so basically we have the decentralized knowledge graph. We have integrations with multiple chains out there, continuous integration as it is at the moment, open source solution, because I think you said that you released it as well as an open source solution, right?
Yes.
And currently you're working on integrations with machine learning and AI technologies. Where do you see that going? Like, what would be the first AI product that would work on top of the knowledge graph?
That's a very interesting question. As the DKG is really infrastructure and it's very general purpose, there can be a lot of different applications where we are working on some. However, generally, if you take it to the principal level, there's two main values given by the DKG to the AI world. One is the integrity that comes from the decentralization in the blockchain. So having verifiable information as input is obviously very valuable, as opposed to having some random, potentially harmful information be used to train a model. So that's one thing. The other thing is the actual graph structure. So so far, the world of machine learning and AI has been really focusing on these, let's say, simpler or more linear structures, like, for example, text, which is essentially a chain of words. So if you take, for example, something like GPT, it basically takes a sequence of tokens or really words, and then somehow figures out how to finish it. So when they create a chatbot, it looks like you're asking a question and it's answering, but essentially just like finishing some sequence that it thinks it should finish, and sometimes making a mistake and hallucinating. What graphs offer is the next level from these linear structures, and it is believed by many people that the graph machine learning is about to be the next stage of evolution in machine learning. There's a lot of problems that are being solved, even in with Google, with the DeepMind. I know that the guys over there are trying to solve some very hard protein folding problems with graph neural networks, essentially, in graph machine learning. So in that sense, the DKG can offer a lot. Very different applications can be built on top of such a fundamental infrastructure. But fundamentally for AI, what it brings is, like I said, verifiability, the new structure, and finally network effect. Because as Bob Metcalfe said once, I believe correctly, he said that the cycles of AI were going periodically with the basically disappearance of data. So it would run out of data, and then like somewhere it would sort of halt, and then we'll get into more data and we'll grow further. And essentially the premise that we have with OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph is that it's going to be the ultimate middleware to connect all of the information in knowledge assets in the world, therefore growing the network effect, and therefore providing all of this towards ML and AI algorithms so they don't run out of data, essentially. And yeah, it's going to be exciting. We're already working on some very cool projects which are GPT-like. However, I cannot reveal that much more. It's still in the phase of not going public.
Oh, that's some spicy stuff that you're throwing out to us right now. Can't wait to see them.
Yeah, we'll share as soon as possible.
Yeah. So yeah, besides everything you said, I think also offering to the people and to the network the proper data and traceable data that everyone can verify on training their models. So, Branimir, this is quite the end of our discussion tonight. It was a pleasure having you here with us. Hope that we're gonna organize some other discussions going further, maybe with other community members as well, maybe with other blockchain companies that we're currently in relationship with. And everyone, please feel free to reach out to Branimir and to OriginTrail, say hi, and thank you for offering us all the knowledge in regards to their project. And also feel free to reach out to Branimir if you have any further questions in regards of what OriginTrail is doing right now and what are their plans for the future. Branimir, any final words?
Thanks for having us, Alex. It was a pleasure, and looking forward to doing more work together with the OGs of knowledge graphs at Google.
Same here. Thank you very much.